Welcome to this episode of our program, Daily Debate. I am Mona Moselhi, sitting here on behalf of my colleague Yasmin Bakir. Today we'll be speaking about Egypt's economy and the recovery it has witnessed at all levels in different sectors, including improved confidence of international investors and international credit agencies, in addition to reforms in the growth of foreign reserves and the unparalleled growth rate. Egypt has made remarkable economic progress translated into the measures included in the economic reform program and the development process of the national economy. Egypt also managed to drastically improve the investment climate, making the country more appealing to foreign investors. We'll be speaking about the Egyptian economy in our episode tonight with our distinguished guest, Dr. Ibrahim Hagazy, Professor of Economy. Thank you so much for being with us.
Pleasure. It's a pleasure, Mona.
And definitely former member of parliament, and we thank you so much for what you have exerted already.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
I appreciate it.
Before we delve into our discussion, let's first have this very quick report on IMF praised Egypt's rather effective crisis management and careful implementation of the reform program. Let's watch.
The International Monetary Fund IMF team reached a staff-level agreement with the Egyptian authorities on the first review of the standby arrangement. The Egyptian authorities discussed in virtual meetings from the 4th till 15th of November recent economic developments and policy priorities in the first review of Egypt's economic reform program, supported by the IMF's 12-month arrangement. The head of the IMF team said in a statement that the IMF team of experts and the Egyptian authorities reached an agreement at the staff level regarding the first review of the Egyptian economic program, supported by the IMF Reserve Preparedness Arrangement of $5.2 billion. The statement added that the Egyptian economy has performed better than expected despite the pandemic, and that containment measures supported by effective crisis management as well as the careful implementation of the reform program helped mitigate the effects of the crisis. After recording a growth rate of 3.6% in the fiscal year 2019-2020, growth is projected to reach 2.8% in the fiscal year 2020-2021, with a modest recovery in major sectors. The net accumulation of international reserves and core balance exceeded the program targets as the authorities' commitment and strong performance helped achieve targeted growth. The statement added that IMF welcomes the Central Bank of Egypt's monetary policy in recent interest rate cuts to further support economic recovery amid muted inflation. The exchange rate is modestly appreciated in the wake of an increase in capital inflows. Continued exchange rate flexibility will help absorb external shocks. Egypt's banking system remains liquid, profitable, and well capitalized. The statement pointed out that Egypt's fiscal policy in the fiscal year 2020-2021 remains appropriately focused on supporting the immediate priorities in health, protecting the most vulnerable, and supporting sectors affected most by the pandemic, and remains on track to achieve a primary surplus of 0.5% of GDP.
Right, welcome back, and back to our topic tonight, the Egyptian economy and its ability to recover even at the backstage of the existence of the coronavirus and its repercussions globally. Let me again welcome our distinguished guest, Dr. Ibrahim Hagazy, Professor of Economy and former parliamentarian. Thank you again for being with us.
Thank you, Ms. Mona.
And let me start with your reading to the economic performance the government and the leadership has carried out with during particularly this very, very critical year.
My reading, first of all, is very positive, especially when you compare the status of Egypt today, economically and socially also, compared to developed nations in the Western world. I mean, still, with all what we've been through and suffering of our economic reforms, the management of the government was very agile during the COVID. And the rapid actions that they took at the fiscal and monetary policies of Egypt during the pandemic is actually what they are bragging about today in the international institutions like the World Bank and the IMF. So my reading is very positive, though that we have still a lot of challenges to face. We have, navigated over the pandemic period, but still what is coming is very also important for Egypt's future.
Yes, indeed. Recently we've seen the IMF experts' declaration after meeting with some of the Egyptian authorities. And we've also seen what the president wrote,
Yes.
Particularly after this meeting and after the World Bank's report on Egypt. Now, how did you read first the IMF meeting with the Egyptian authorities and the conclusion of such a meeting, and how important was that conclusion? And we'll discuss after that the president's statements regarding this issue.
Well, reading, like everybody actually, the reading of the IMF and the World Bank, because concurrently in November 2020, the World Bank have issued a specific report about Egypt's economic progress and outlook. And so when you read both of them, the IMF and the World Bank, they are talking very positively about Egypt, especially on the issue of maintaining the GNP or the GDP growth rate.
3.6, right?
Yes. Although that it was forecasted before the pandemic of 5.8 at a growth rate. But, comparing again, I'd like to compare between how Egypt is and other countries. There is so many other countries that their GNP is negative, not even positive.
Yes.
And so this is something that is, have to be appreciated. And second, I think they were referring to what Egypt did at the fiscal policies and the monetary policies. Fiscal is that, with the lockdowns, with, slow of the economy and the employment and all of these factors, there was an immediate, call from fiscal policies to fund, the needy people, to go aggressively in health care concerns and the provisions of medical supply, which is very important during the pandemic, and at the same time to try to ease the burden of creditors, and especially, the initiative done by the Central Bank of Egypt for tourism, for agriculture, and for the social part of funding, the daily labors of £500 per month. These are all, very important factors that it was mentioned in the World Bank and the IMF, showing the positiveness of what I call an effective crisis management, because usually the monetary policy is not into the fiscal policy, but they are integrated together. So when you see the arms of the executives in Egypt here are working together to try to massage Egypt away from, the risks of the economic recession that can take place, which is actually taking other countries. And so even when the central bank was step by step decreasing the interest rate, this was good because they noticed that inflation is going down, so inflation is under control. Now it's time to grow the economy, and it's time to go back to reaching a growth rate of 5.8. So this is a stimulus for the investors, whether the local investors, domestic investors, and international investors, coupled also with our political stability in Egypt, which is, again, very important to be highlighted. When you look at all the countries surrounding Egypt, still, Egypt is a very stable country. It's a very secure country in terms of attacking and handling the issue of terrorism. Thanks to God, we are almost reaching elimination of total terrorism. It's not yet over, but when you compare between now and before,
comparison, not at all.
then you can see that this also encourages. We had a lot of investment laws and legislations that were done during the last couple of years that are getting the fruits now, even during the pandemic. So these are all things that they were referred to in the World Bank and the IMF. So, the details that you can read, especially on the World Bank report, it puts its hands on two things: the positiveness that took place and the management of the crisis, and at the same time it highlights the challenges that is facing Egypt. Like when we were talking before being on air, the issue of the private sector. We've done a lot of legislations to give the green light for the private sectors. We have reformed the public enterprise companies. We have dealt with the issue of corporate governors, even in the governments. We have tried to maintain the expenditures of the government low because our revenue generated due to the pandemic is also decreasing. So many other things we can talk about it, but again, these are very positive issues, and honestly, not just because I'm Egyptian. No, when you compare with other countries and well-developed countries, no, they are suffering. They're suffering socially.
They are, and big economies also.
You never expect to see that these long queues for food, for free food in the United States, and in the most wealthiest states like
Germany,
California,
France,
exactly.
Britain,
and so all of this,
Italy.
When you compare with our stand today, truly this is not something that we are happy to be with. But I think what is good about Egyptians is that they follow their leadership, and so this is really, and they sustain the suffering in order to see the fruits of tomorrow. And I think this was part of the success that was not mentioned in the IMF and the World Bank, but we have to give a raise of hand and applause for Egyptians, because they know that...
Give credit at least to the
yes,
people
exactly.
who excited the work.
Yeah, it's true policies, true taking actions, true being agile and being flexible, but at the same time, who is the recipient of these policies is the Egyptian population. And so they have to be thanked, because they're standing behind the government, standing behind the president, had a tremendous impact on what we are today.
Indeed. Well, here, sir, you pinpointed your finger on the headlines of what the IMF said and the World Bank. These are the big headlines or the big notes.
Yes.
Still the details. And let me here take some of what the president here spoke about. And here the president wrote, for instance, on his official social media page that saying that the efforts achieved by the country in the last period have been commended by major international financial institutions, topped by the IMF's experts. Declaration which stated that Egypt's economy has exceeded expectations and showed resilience,
Yes, resilience.
during the pandemic. So here, resilience. And this is a word that has lots and lots of meaning. How did you read the word resilience?
First of all, what's the resilience? Resilience means recovering from stressful conditions and situations. So that's what resilience is. And so I think what they were referring to, what the president in his social media message, official message, he was, at least showing the pride of the Egyptians. Because resilience means that you are under stress and we are recovering. Now, the policies that explain the resilience is related to, first of all, the cut of subsidies, which is, again, part of the suffering that we have in the budget of our governments. So cutting subsidies, this is number one. Number two is freeing and devaluing the currency. So in this case, your true import and export will have more chance to grow, and imports will be curbed by the devaluation of the Egyptian currency, because they'll be more expensive, and that's exactly what happens. So these factors here, and also with the devaluation of the currency, you have raised the interest rate to protect the Egyptian pound for a while. So these are factors. That's what I call it, the resilience here, that because Egypt is a very wealthy nation, we have a lot of natural resources, and we have a lot of human resources. And we have also a lot of technical resources. I mean, our scientists are all over, not just in Egypt, but also abroad. So these factors by itself, if you manage them properly, you can be on a better situation. And that's exactly what happened. All we need is the proper management of our resources.
Utilizing them in their proper places.
Exactly. So that's what resilience means for me, that you were under stressful situation because you were forced due to the explosive population growth rate in Egypt in the previous decades, not just this year or previous years. Then you were put under a lot of stress. Stress, the government is under stress, and the population also, because they're still looking, regardless of the subsidy they had, regardless of many other free things they had, they were looking for a better standard of living. So here our president came, and he took on his shoulder the decision of enough is enough. We have to be transparent, and we have to go in the right direction. So the recovery here, I think, is what we saw on the figures of 2019, and we saw on the first quarter of 2020 as well. But us, among other nations globally, were affected by the pandemic. So I cannot really judge Egypt's performance based on the last 2 quarters.
Indeed. So when we really speak about the Egyptian performance and we really speak about the economic reforms that Egypt has witnessed, then we have to divide it here, or we have to see it from 2 different perspectives.
Yeah.
The one that preceded the corona pandemic, and the one that has took place during this very, very particular year. We hope that it should not last. And what we're seeing now would eventually end. But here, if we speak about the economic reforms that Egypt has witnessed before this year, which means in 5 years, before the 2020, how do you evaluate the steps that were taken? Exactly what were the steps that were taken in order to carry out with an effective reform, economic reform program?
To some extent, the steps were a little bit, discussed, and I don't want to use the word dictated, but it was organized with the international institutions. Because if you look back like 5 and 6 years ago, Egypt was in need of getting out of revolutions, 11 and 13. And so you were in need of foreign direct investment. You are in need of pouring, fresh money into the economy.
And boosting confidence also.
Exactly. So this is all, you cannot do it internally. So you had to go outside, because if the green light is given from outside, especially from the credit institutions and the World Bank and the international donors, more or less, then you can take the appropriate steps. So what I read is that the steps were done properly, that for the first time, that you start to negotiate your terms along with the terms of the international world, more or less. And we came to the compromise of what we have been doing as a gradual step of subsidy elimination, as a gradual step of devaluation of the currency, because we started by 16 and it reached to 18, and then it went back now because 15. There is a trust in the economy, more or less. Plus the reserves. We have to be very, aware of where did our reserves stand, foreign currency reserves, and where do they stand today. Up before the pandemic, we were 45 billion US dollars as reserves. Now, with all the pandemic, with all the spending, with all the initiatives of the central bank and the government, and the social solidarity initiatives as well, Takaful and Karama,
yes.
All of this sucked a little bit of the reserve. However, we are still on a safe side, which means that we have more than 7 months coverage of our imports, because we have now 38.5, I believe, billion US dollars. So all of this actually highlight that it was done and managed properly, because we were working in cooperations and in collaboration with the international institutions. So that's why the beginning of the pandemic, when the Egyptian government went for the IMF requesting the request for immediate financing, they were giving this $2.8 billion, and then they set again now to give the green light for the 5.8, which is a total of $8 billion US dollars, as a bridging gap for Egypt pandemic focus.
Here I'll get back to the IMF statements that pointed out that Egypt's fiscal policy 2020-2021 remains appropriately focused on supporting the immediate priorities in health, protecting the most vulnerable, and supporting sectors affected most by the pandemic, and also remains on track to achieve a primary of 0.5% of the GDP. Of course, we wanted more than that, but we're speaking about a global crisis. How do you assess that? Priorities: health, protecting the most vulnerable, and supporting sectors affected by the pandemic. How did the government manage to do that despite its own challenges that emerged, as you said, respectively, from previous challenges and revolutions and stresses and at the same time remained on track to achieve such a surplus and manage those very, very vital sectors in Egypt.
Being a former member of the parliament, when you look at how Egypt actually have focused or faced the pandemic, you have to look at the revenue part. Revenue part went down dramatically. Tourism went down, worker remittance went down, your non-oil export went down. Yes. So these by themselves here are a warning sign for the Egyptian government. So they automatically had to cut on their expenditures, especially the wages side and the spending side. But that was not at the expense of health and education, because they are actually part of President Sisi, presidential program that he was focusing on building the Egyptian human being in 3 angles: health, education, and culture. So that's why, being promised by the president and direly needed also for future Egypt development of standard of living, then health and education are extremely important. The question now is, how can you solve this dilemma of your revenues going down? It's a force majeure. So you didn't do something wrong, but the global picture and the global environment was not receptive. Yes. Because of the lockdowns, because of so many things. Then they had to go to borrow, and we can see that the Egyptian government borrowed 5 billion in terms of euro bonds. Luckily, they were very effective in switching from T-bills, which is actually short-term lending or borrowing, to bonds, which means that the maturity here is longer, and so that's why you will have more breathing frame for you to spend and to be able to also to cover your plans of health and education. And bear in mind also that these two, it just happens for Egypt luck, that because of the pandemic, they were stressed more. I mean, I remember days when we were in the parliament, then we had a lot of feedbacks that why you do this now? Why you go into the digital world of education, for instance? So why do these reforms? And during the pandemic, and you can see what happened for the Sanawiyya Amma, the exam,
yes.
At the end of the day, everybody was very anxious to see the outcome. But at the end of the day, it passed, and it was very successfully. Same thing also for health and education. If we didn't have these programs right on track for execution and implementation, we wouldn't have been able to at least cover, the emergencies, the rooms, the hospitals. And I think when you compare again with what is happening, worldwide, and especially in the United States, you can see that we had a good management, and I think because of the seeds of these two important factors, health and education, are there. The question is, how did I fund them? The answer is very clear, and that's put a burden. The clearness of the answer is that I borrowed more. I don't think that a lot of Egyptians know that Egypt actually have invested in what we call a green bond. Green bond is actually a way...
No, wait.
Yeah.
We'll speak about the green bond, because we'll speak about the green bond and we'll speak about the green economy.
Okay, because
but before
of the pandemic.
It is, and it's very important. Before we continue on with our discussion, let's first have this report and in numbers, how Egyptian economy withstood the COVID-19. Let's watch.
According to data issued by the Egyptian cabinet, despite the repercussions of the coronavirus worldwide, Egypt topped the emerging market countries in containing the rate of inflation during the current year. Thanks to the economic reform plan followed by the government, which balanced between economic measures and protectionist programs, a plan that pulled and boosted the Egyptian economy. According to the International Monetary Fund, Egypt achieved the annual decline in the inflation rate in emerging markets in 2020 compared to 2019, with a decrease of 8.2%. Among the effects of the economic reform plan, inflation rates fell to 5.7% during the last year, 2019-2020, compared to 13.9% in 2018-2019. The indicators of unemployment also reflected the resilience and development of the Egyptian economy. According to recent data released by the Central Agency for Public Mobilization and Statistics in Egypt, CAPMAS, the Unemployment rate declined to 7.3% in the third quarter of this year, compared to 7.8% a year ago. Egypt's monetary reserves rose to $39.22 billion by the end of last October, according to the data from the Central Bank of Egypt. These indicators reflect the solidity of the Egyptian economy that President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi spoke about when congratulating the government on the positive economic indicators it achieved. In the same regard, major international financial institutions praised those efforts, foremost among which was the official announcement by experts from the International Monetary Fund that said that the performance of the Egyptian economy exceeded expectations. The economy is the language of numbers, and numbers confirm the truth of what Egypt has achieved on ground in the recent period. Unemployment rates have decreased, the budget deficit has decreased, and the surplus has increased. The Egyptian pound began to recover against the US dollar, especially with the investments made by foreign investment funds that entered Egypt with $10.35 billion to buy treasury bills and bonds. All these factors, along with other positive indicators, confirm Egypt's economic achievements. Long live Egypt, long live Egypt, long live Egypt.
Right, welcome back. Back to you, sir. And we were speaking about the green bonds and the green economy.
Yes.
Because not everyone would really understand what is green economy and what is green bonds. So please.
Part, as we were talking before the break, part of what the Egyptian government have done successfully is actually to borrow funds and to borrow long-term funds, which is much more important than borrowing short-term funds, because short-term funds will put more burden on our budget, our government budget. So that's something to be appraised. And also to be appraised, quite honestly, is that the total debt ratio to our GDP has went down from 108 to 90%, which is still, it's a high number, but at least there is a progress. And obviously when you have debt that is increasing, and then you have the GDP also increasing, then if that increase more than that, then definitely it will reduce the burden on the government budget. But a way of diversifying your funding sources, then I think, and in line with the international perspective now of climate change and the impact of climate change on health, on many other factors, then the notion today is the green. And green economy does not mean that everything will be green, like agriculture and green is in every place. But a green economy means how we tackle and confront the climate change by conserving the environment, by relying on natural ways of the standard of living of any society. So sovereign green bonds means that I, as a government, I am obliged to take this money and not to inject it except in environment-related projects, conservations, injected in renewable energy projects, and that's what Egypt did actually, and then also to make sure that there will be a green society, means green transportation, relying less on these kind of pollution oriented projects into green projects. They rely more on the natural resources. And I think this is a good way also of telling the foreign investors that our economy is receptive for your ideas and projects. Because the difference between a developing country and an underdeveloped country or a developed country is that developed countries also always have this kind of a long-term vision, that when they see the signs of the climate change impact, then they have to take action. That's what they are taking currently now. I've been lately in a visit to Germany, and I realized that 40% of the gas stations now have electric charging for their cars, and that's even what Egypt is going. And I have also to announce that Egypt has already signed a contract to revive the Egyptian public sector company, Nasr.
Yes.
And they signed with the largest electric car producers in China. And so within a year and a half or two maximum, you'll have the first Egyptian electric car assembled in Egypt under the management of Dongfeng, which is one of the largest Chinese manufacturers of electric cars. So that also shows that Egypt is going into this green. Many now of our gas stations have electric charging for buses, and I think also the government have already signed another one of the public sector companies, and in collaboration with the private sector, to start to manufacture electric buses, buses that are energized by electricity rather than gas, petrol. So these are examples of what
we're speaking also about, because this is sustainable, because this is would really reduce the burden on our depleted energy resources, right?
It elevates the burden of the budget to put more money in these imported goods. And so you release the budget of the government to channel this surplus that is coming from sustainability of renewable projects and channel it into education reforms and health reforms. So that's it's internally for us, but what the international investors are looking at is that, are you receptive to my ideas where I am excelling on or not? So you see many of the international names are actually collaborating with the private sector and also with the government. And also one of the things that the IMF spoke about it, that many sectors in Egypt, the government start to open for international private investors, especially on the electricity side. We have now mega projects, we have a surplus of electricity. And that was not done standalone by ourselves, but it was in collaboration with large electricity generating companies like Siemens. And the same thing also for this solar projects and the wind project, also wind energy. And all of this is done in collaboration with the know-how that comes from outside. So these are ways of, number one, diversifying your source of fund by calling this sovereign green bills, and at the same time also it's helping your GDP growth, because you will have new sectors that are highly demanded globally, and I think step by step we'll be able to export, because who else on the globe have sun that is shining for us almost 11 months like Egypt. And so by going in that direction, especially on the energy and relying on sustainable renewable sources, I think this is a good step, and I think step by step we'll see the fruits of it even in the future.
Yes, hopefully. And we're filled of hope for that, because also this is very costly. But we have to deal with that, and we have to go on with that. If we speak about reform programs, then we have to speak about monetary policies that supports any kind of reform programs and help produce what we achieved. Most of people do not understand the strategy or the plans that were put by the central bank in order to support the Egyptian reform programs. So what is the logic that went by the central bank in order to be able to put a monetary policy that would support the reform and the economic reform programs made by the leadership?
First of all, for monetary policies, you have to be flexible and you have to be adaptive. So you cannot stick to one policy all the time. So we have to go back to when we started these economic reforms prior to the pandemic, where we were requested, and I think it was a time factor, the issue of devaluation of the currency, or freeing your currency. Now, freeing the currency could have negative impacts, so that's why automatically you had to increase the interest rate. So you protect your currency so people can at least put their deposits in the Egyptian pounds, and that's what happened. So here, when you free the protection of the Egyptian currency, you have to provide also the support of it. But again, it went successfully because for a couple of years it was well balanced and well managed as an Egyptian currency. But then when you go into the pandemic, then you are facing with the issue of recession. And so still inflation is under monitoring because when you devalue it and then you increase the interest rate, you are looking your eyes on the inflation. And so this was going down step by step until we reached this year. Actually it's 4.5 with all what it happens. It was higher and it was lower 3 and then it went to 4, but it's within manageable rates. So now it is time where you say, oh, my GDP is going down, and so I have to give this kind of a boosting to the economy. How are you going to do that when you still have high interest rates? Because high interest rates attract money
to the banks.
out of the circulation. And so you start to decrease interest rate. But at the same time, your eye is still at the inflation. You increase and then you monitor, you watch. If inflation doesn't go up, then you do it again and again. And so it's a way now of saying it's time, because we are scared of GDP going down, because GDP going down means unemployment also will go up. And we do have the unemployment rate during pandemic is going up. So you have to monitor the fiscal measures and indicators, and then look how can I adapt my monetary policies. Of course, many Egyptians who were very happy with the high interest rates, but economically it creates a passive economy, putting your money and you're not investing, and no investment means no employment and no demand for products. So it's a vicious cycle that you go through. So what is going on step by step is the right directions, but it could be at the expense of some of the lower
some sectors
income
in the
society. Exactly. And so I think this is one of the challenges that Egypt has to look at now. You're going fine to protect your economy and to protect the employment and to protect the GDP and to control inflation. Very good, excellent. But you have also to take care of the outcome.
The other sectors that will be affected.
Exactly. And so I call this as a challenge that we have to look at.
So I have many questions, but I will mix one all together. Here, the president has said or praised the directives, here with his directives, to draw up a pro-private sector policies in order to encourage attracting more local and foreign investments.
Yes.
And we're speaking here about a monetary policy that is
enabling that.
We need to understand, because not me, of course, we're speaking about the foreign investors, we're speaking about the local investors. We need to understand what were exactly the policies or the pro-private sector policies that were put in order to encourage and to find opportunities for local investors and foreign investors to come to put their investments, and they would be encouraged to do that, because we're speaking here about capitals, and we all know that money, when we speak about capitals,
yes.
we don't find enough courage until they are
there.
Yes, until it exists or the results are apparent for them.
Well, I have to step here as a former member of the parliament, and I have to tell you that we have, during the last at least 2 years, there were a flux of legislations that were geared toward exactly what the president was talking about. Just to give an example, we have amendments to the companies law, قانون الشركات. We have now, a ministerial investment committee headed by the Prime Minister to look at the investment programs and the investment, solutions and helping foreign investors. Of course, the new investment law with all the clarity that was done and the amendments. And even after it was done, there was amendments to it. The bankruptcy law also have been changed. The value-added, the VAT tax law, we moved from a sales tax to a VAT tax law. The anti-cyber and information technology, the e-payment law, the banks and the central bank law, the capital market law, the public enterprise law, where we allowed now less involvement from employees and more corporate governance in the management of public sector companies. So this allows foreign direct investors to share in the management of the company, in the board of directors. And we have shifted, especially on the public sector, because we have so many good companies that are public enterprises. The question is the management and how management is. We are now also the data protection law. I mean, if I keep counting the number, the tax dispute resolution law, we have shifted now to rely on, rather than committees, rely on the legal actions and be quicker. The bankruptcy law, all of this actually could be termed as legislations and policy. Because usually legislations are enacted to give the green light for policies to be executed. And so when you imagine in less than 2 years exactly, we have more than 15 investment and technology and financing laws and also labor laws that are freeing the economy from many of the obstacles, then definitely if an investor wants to come, he will be ready to read these laws because they are being implemented, and some of them, because they were just finished last July, I think by the beginning of next year they will be into actions and execution.
Yes. We're awaiting, and of course we'll be hoping for more and more. Unfortunately, my time is out, so I have to end it here, but it was very interesting to know how we did throughout the past period as we are getting to the end of this year.
Yes.
And Dr. Ibrahim Hagazy, Professor of Economy and former parliamentarian, we thank you so much for being with us tonight.
I thank you, Mrs. Mona, and I wish the best for the Egyptian population. And we always have to be optimistic. There is always a brighter future, especially that this is a country that believes in God. And if you believe in God, trust that God will always be with us.
And in God we put our trust. Thank you so much, Ted.
Shukran.
Dear viewers, many thanks for watching, and tomorrow will be another very interesting episode. So until tomorrow, it's good night.